There have been boycotts, protests, and standing ovations as Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the US Congress. This in what can only be called America's crazy week. A week where the news cycle moved so fast, it was tough to keep up with it. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. In a moment from now, we'll be going across live to one of the world's foremost political scientists and thinkers, Ian Bremmer, to talk about the US presidential elections, but also what America's foreign policy might look like depending on who the new president is. The United States had to confront its first tricky moment when it comes to Israel and Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu was there in a week when there were many congressmen and women who decided to stay away from his address, even as others gave him a standing ovation. Kamala Harris, now the nominee for the presidential race for the Democrats, was conspicuous by her absence. Donald Trump's assassination bid seems to have been all but forgotten, at least for now. It's fallen off the headlines. Here in India, the elections are being watched very carefully. Remember, the Prime Minister has a very good equation with both of the leaders, Joe Biden, who dropped out of the race, as well as Donald Trump. But if Kamala Harris is the president, what might relations between India and the United States of America look like? Let me welcome to the program our newsmaker today. Ian Bremmer is joining us. As I said, he's one of the world's foremost analysts. He's the president of the Eurasia Group. Ian, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and to learn from you. This has been a crazy week, and that's putting it mildly. Are you surprised by any of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is unprecedented in my life in U.S. politics. Vladimir Lenin never actually said, you know, sometimes you have decades in politics where weeks happen. You have weeks sometimes where decades happen. The U.S. is tilting towards the latter. The thing that surprised me the most was that the Secret Service was so incredibly lax in their capacity to defend the former president from an amateur, from someone who clearly was not professionally trained. We were within an instant, a fraction of a second, of the American president being gunned down on live television in front of the country. I tell you, Barkha, I mean, people aren't talking much about that. They're talking about other things. They're talking about, you know, the way he stood up and said, fight. They're talking about his vice president nominee, J.D. Vance. They're talking about, of course, what's happened with Biden stepping down and Kamala Harris. But the most important thing in the week is that if he had been killed, and that could have very easily happened, we would now be facing a George Floyd style series of riots in cities across the country with a lot more guns, and probably with members of the police force and National Guard participating in those riots. That's what would have happened if Trump had been assassinated. The country would be in a radically different place, much worse than 1968. And because it didn't happen, we're not talking about it, but it is this underlying instability politically and dysfunction and tribalism, polarization, that makes the United States so singularly dangerous in terms of its political system as a democracy today and in this electoral cycle. So lots for us to talk about, but that's the thing that I was most surprised by. That's the thing I'm most concerned about.
I think you said in one of your interviews that Americans versus Americans is the most dangerous war that's out there. And you said that before the assassination bid on Trump. So it was almost prophetic. After what happened with Trump, the Secret Service chief has, of course, virtually been sacked. She's resigned, but after a roasting by a bipartisan panel of American politicians. My question to you is this. Is there any chance of this polarization, American versus American war, as you've called it, diminishing? Was Trump's assassination bid a wake-up call for Americans to say, hey, we need to start talking to each other, or is it just more of the same?
I wish it was. I mean, certainly the nature of that incident, the first assassination attempt since 1981 against Reagan, you know, there were calls for unity. President Biden gave a speech that evening that certainly was the right message. And as you know, It didn't go anywhere. The next morning, actually, Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson also gave a very strong unifying speech. And both of them called to reduce the temperature. That lasted hours. Barkha, this is not like 9/11, where the country rallied together and made some very big mistakes around the world. But domestically, Democrats, Republicans, all Americans, all flying the same flag, all deeply comfortable with each other and their president after that unthinkable attack on American soil. This is not that. This is much more like the insurrection attempt of January 6th. Where you had some great speeches by Democrats and Republicans deeply criticizing what happened in Congress, all of the criminals that illegally entered and were trying to overturn an election that needed to be certified and that was free and fair. Trump supporting that. You had people like Republican Speaker, Senate Majority Leader, McConnell, who made the right kind of speech. But within weeks, it was all over. Everyone retreated into their camps. The impeachment was politicized and failed. And now Donald Trump goes around during his rallies and actually plays the national anthem as sung by the perpetrators of January 6th. And while they are singing, he refers to them as patriots. He salutes them. So incredibly divided on the back of January 6th. Some believe they're patriots, some believe they're criminals, and everyone has retreated into their separate camps. That is exactly what is happening after the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. A lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of, oh my God, he wasn't really shot. It was really shrapnel. And no, he's lying about it. A lot of it was an inside job. It was a setup. There were 2 shooters. There were 3 shooters. It wasn't real. I mean, this is insanity stuff. This is the kind of stuff that you would see, sort of on bad websites in Russia, in the Middle East. You're seeing this among people that are respected influencers in the United States. And the rhetoric that we have seen from political leaders on the right and left, you would think that there had certainly not been this close to the former president being killed only 2 weeks ago. It is a deeply dysfunctional place for the U.S. And again, your question, is there any chance that this can turn America towards unity? Absolutely not. Long term, maybe, but this, I hate to say it, like January 6th, too small of a crisis for Americans to take it seriously enough to do anything different about their politics.
Now, in the midst of all this dysfunctionality and dangerous dysfunctionality, things changed very rapidly politically. Biden went kicking and screaming. When he finally went, everybody applauded him for at least, in the last mile doing the right thing. Kamala Harris, again, a lot of interest here in India. Her mother was from Tamil Nadu. Her father was from Jamaica. So a lot of Indians follow her as a member of the Indian diaspora, even though she may not position herself as that. My question is, Kamala Harris was never very popular as a vice president. But the last 48 to 72 hours, she's suddenly become near cult. There are memes around her. There's Beyonce giving her the use of her song. She's everywhere, and she's raised a record sort of amount of funds. What's actually going on? How has the energy around Kamala Harris flipped so dramatically?
Well, as you say, Biden did not want to stand down. He ultimately did. And he did voluntarily. No one could have forced him, but they cut off a lot of his money, the big funders, and that matters a lot in a system that is run so much by money, like the United States. And all of the Democratic leaders were telling him, you can't do this. Also, importantly, the internal polls that the White House was getting showed that the vast majority, not just of voters, but even a strong majority of Democrats, believed that he was not mentally and physically capable of running the country for another 4 years. Now, by the way, everyone I know that had been meeting with the president for the last year and a half, was also saying that privately. So a big problem here is that a lot of people were covering up for Biden when it was clear that he should not have been running. And ultimately, he needed to make the decision. That's why he was still there for as long as he was. He refused to step down. He ultimately did. I mean, I will say, I think that Donald Trump, facing the same pressure, would not have stepped down. As we know, Donald Trump, facing the same pressure after he lost an election, refused to accept that. Anyone else would have accepted it. Bibi Netanyahu wouldn't accept it. There are leaders, you and I know them around the world, that we have seen them, who place themselves consistently over their country. And ultimately, I mean, Biden was showing a lot of signs of ego and temper and refusing to listen, but ultimately he did a critical thing. And the reason it's so critical is because not only was he going to lose against Trump, but he was going to face a landslide. Trump was going to take the House and the Senate easily. The filibuster would be gone in the Senate. Now you have someone who is radically more age appropriate, robust, intellectually capable, energetic, charismatic, attractive, who has served as vice president for 3+ years. And I mean, a lot of people, including Republicans in opposition, like Nikki Haley, said, if you're voting for Biden, you're voting for Haley, because we all know, even though you're lying about it, we all know that Biden can't serve for another 4 years. So, I mean, people already understood that we're Biden supporters, that, yeah, this is going to end up being a Haley administration. So the fact that
you mean a Kamala administration?
Excuse me. Say that again. Yes.
Yeah, I was confused for a moment. I was like, this has been a crazy week, but it can't be that crazy.
Not that crazy. No, I assure you that this was going to be a Harris administration.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
so clearly, when everyone then says you've got to step down, and Biden steps down, but within the hour he says, I strongly endorse Haley. I wasn't surprised at all about that. Harris. I'm going to keep doing this. It's both kind of centrist Indian background women who were talking about each other in politics. No, when he says I'm endorsing Kamala, and then you quickly see Nancy Pelosi and the two major candidates that could oppose her on the national stage, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, also endorsing her. It's all about Kamala now. She's raised a ton of money. She's much more attractive to younger voters, and she's not the favorite to win. Trump is the favorite to win, but she now has a fighting chance. It is a closer election. We have over 3 months, over 100 days to go. That is a very long time. Certainly, you're not expecting a landslide. This is not what Trump wanted. Trump wanted Biden to stay in. This is now going to be much more challenging for him.
So tell me this. Trump now looks like the old guy, but nobody's going to actually ask him to step down. There's also huge question marks over the choice of his running mate, J.D. Vance, who has some completely crazy positions on divorce, marriage, domestic violence. There's even whispers that Trump might change him midway. I mean, do you think that could happen?
No, they're not going to change him midway. I mean, they're going with J.D. Vance. You're not going to see Trump admit to making that kind of mistake. I mean, he gets rid of people that work for him constantly, but as the VP nominee, no. In part because Trump likes J.D. I mean, see, this was the unfettered choice. Mike Pence, first time around, was the choice by a Trump administration, a Trump candidate that understood that he was not the favorite to win, that he needed evangelicals, he needed establishment sensibilities, he needed someone that calmed, his extremes, his rough edges, and also, as it turned out, someone that wasn't completely loyal to Trump, as we saw ultimately in certifying the election for Joe Biden in 2020, 2021. Very, very important. Now, J.D. Vance is the one person that wanted to be VP who said, I never would have certified that election unless the delegates had flipped for Trump. In other words, Mr. Trump, I am prepared to subvert a democratic election for you, sir. You matter more to me than American democracy. You matter more to me than America. That's a very big deal. That's who Trump wants, a 39-year-old who has policy chops. He's smart, he's energetic, and he will do everything. And it doesn't matter, he's not going to ask any questions about the legality, about the concerns, about the impropriety. He's just going to do it. So this was Trump after destroying Biden in a horrible debate, right? Where the whole country is like, we got no chance, Trump's going to win. He puts in a person who's not going to get him any more votes. It's not going to, carry, independence. He's instead going to do Trump's bidding when Trump is president. And that might have been a big mistake, right? Because ultimately now Biden has pulled out, and you have a candidate who's a former prosecutor who's going to go after Trump as a convicted felon, right? As a sexual assaulter, as an unfit human being that should be in jail. And that is, Biden couldn't do any of that, couldn't land a punch, could barely throw one, right? Now you've got a fighter, someone who actually made Biden look like a racist on the debate stage. That's why Joe Biden, his wife, was so unhappy with Kamala, because Kamala's prepared to be rough. And if Trump goes too hard against her, he might end up looking more like a sexist, more like a racist. That could turn off a lot of women. That could turn off a lot of independents. So again, Barkha, I want to be clear. Trump is the favorite. Trump is ahead in the polls, and Trump is likely to win. But Kamala is absolutely in this race. And J.D. Vance as Trump's VP is not an advantage at this point.
Let's talk a little bit about whether Kamala's politics are different, both domestically and internationally or globally, which takes me to Netanyahu's visit. Crazy polarization again, a lot of sort of congressmen and women deciding to stay away. Nancy Pelosi today jumping in to say, this was all wrong. But then those who stay in actually give him a rousing standing ovation. It all looks terribly confused. And the next time America wants to preach to the rest of the world, including India, on a values-based order, people are going to say, you couldn't even take a position on what's happening in Gaza, which is not to justify what the Hamas did, which is not to sort of take the extreme left position and not call out what the Hamas did. But, what's happening has gone too far, and the Americans couldn't say that. Do you think the Netanyahu visit has been a complete mess, A? And B, do you think it matters in the elections for young voters especially?
Well, the good news for Kamala Harris is that the fact that this has been an unprecedented week in U.S. politics has really made the Netanyahu visit much less important. It would have dominated the news for the entire week. As it is, it's not even what you're bothering to ask me about in the first 15 minutes of our conversation, right? And, and you're very interested in international affairs. For most people, especially in the U.S., this is all about everything but Israel and Palestine. Now, I do think that the United States has a position on Israel, and it has a fairly consolidated position. That position just happens to be out of step with the rest of the world. And that position is that Israel is America's strongest ally by a long margin in the Middle East. The U.S. has supported the Israeli government to destroy Hamas, is providing billions of dollars of military equipment to Israel to help them defend themselves and also to help them persecute that war. And that's been true for not just all the Republicans, but also a majority of the Democrats. There were a number of Democrats that chose not to show up for Netanyahu's visit. And certainly there is a division inside the Democratic Party where a lot of rank and file voters are more supportive of the Palestinian position in the war than they are of Israel's. But the strong majority of the United States supports Israel in this war and is less concerned about the well-being of Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and to the extent that there has been enormous civilian casualties and displacement in Gaza. Most Americans blame Hamas for that primarily, as opposed to Israel. So, I mean, I don't think it's confusing. I understand what's going on, but it is not the position that the Indian population takes, although, of course, India has been much closer to the Israeli position than the rest of the global South. It's certainly not the position of most countries in the world.
So let's talk a little bit about Kamala Harris, a possible Kamala Harris presidency, and what that might mean for geopolitics. Would it be different from that of Biden? I mean, in some ways, she is seen to be more on the left of Biden. Is that how you would see her?
I think that she is a little more on the left of Biden. Certainly, if you look at her climate policies, for example, the fact that she initially wanted to ban fracking, she backed away from it. She was a supporter of AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. There was a lot of fiscal spend attached to that. She was, of course, a big signatory of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a lot of money for red and blue states and jobs and infrastructure, but for sustainable and post-carbon energy. But you would not call her a progressive. You would call her center-left in the American spectrum. Certainly as a former prosecutor, pretty tough on crime when she was in California. I would say very in bed with big financial interests, corporate interests, Hollywood, tech interests, all of the people that one needs to be successful in a state like California. Yeah. I mean, the question is she going to appeal to the middle class in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, as someone who is perceived as a California progressive? And that's certainly going to inform how she's thinking about her vice presidential nominee, and why people are thinking about centrist white men from swing states, like Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, like Mark Kelly from Arizona. Someone like that, I think, is very likely to get the nod. But on foreign policy, she has been very consistent with Biden. We've seen that in terms of her shift on the border. Just like Biden, we've seen that in terms of her statements on China. She's led the U.S. delegation for the Munich Security Conference for the last several years, met with all of those heads of state, very consistent position on Russia, Ukraine, for example. The one place that I do think you would see Kamala not reflecting Biden, but reflecting more of his administration is on Israel, Palestine. I think that she's more in step with the Europeans on that issue. Mm-hmm. She's more assertively concerned about the well-being of the Palestinians than Biden. She's less of an overt pro-Zionist than Biden personally. So I do think that is a bit of a difference. But foreign policy has not been her focus as vice president. It's been much more on domestic policy, on social issues, on abortion rights, women's rights, these sorts of things.
So let me ask you, I have only a couple of minutes left. You said Trump is the favorite, Kamala's in with a fighting chance. What could catapult her fortunes? And an affiliated question, why haven't the Obamas endorsed her yet?
I think the Obamas haven't endorsed her because they are taking their time in the same way they did in the early days with Clinton, when Clinton was the nominee. They want an opportunity to allow this primary to play out. They believe that she will be stronger if she is not the object of a coronation, right? So convincing people, as opposed to everyone in the Democratic political machine suddenly says it's all about Kamala, after all of these people were also saying Biden can win, Biden's there, he's fine, he's no problem for 4 years. You understand that, that doesn't necessarily inspire confidence. This is not because Obama has a problem with Kamala, not at all. And it's certainly not like the rumors that, he wants Michelle Obama to run. No, there's zero chance of that happening, literally zero. But it is that they want there to be at least some possibility that this looks like a competitive process. And Kamala, when she came out with her first statement after Biden endorsed her, said, I want to run for and win the nomination, not I accept it, right? I want to win the nomination. She understands that language is important.
Yeah. In the end, from an Indian perch, right, we had Prime Minister Modi contentiously, before Biden won the election, give a slogan, Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar, which was a kind of riff on his domestic slogan here. His relations with Biden have been pretty good as well. Indo-US, despite a few tensions, has largely been on a solid footing. But there's some perception that if Kamala Harris were to be president, she would be less indulgent of India on certain issues. than Joe Biden has been. Do you agree with that? There's also been a certain degree of enhanced tension after Modi went to Russia and what unfolded there. So, how do you see the India-US question playing out, depending on who wins the presidential election?
No meaningful tension from Modi's trip to Russia. I mean, it was embarrassing that he embraced Putin publicly, but of course, none of the requests that Putin had to step up the economic relationship between the two countries played out. There were no commitments that were signed. That matters a lot more to the Americans. Everyone sees that India's defense relationship with Russia has deteriorated dramatically and is reorienting towards the United States and American allies around the world. That's very important. So I wouldn't, no one's even talking about it in the last, sort of 2 weeks, even at NATO, barely came up, frankly. Now, in terms of India's relations with the US, India is one of the very few countries in the world where it doesn't matter who wins this presidential election. They're in a very strong position. Part of that is because the one place that there is consensus policy in the US is on China. Democrats and Republicans very concerned that China's America's most important adversary. There's some language about tipping towards Cold War. India is a principal beneficiary of that. Of course, Kamala Harris with South Asian, with Indian lineage, and when she traveled to India, didn't talk that much about policy, but my God, she thought she had a great trip there. She was incredibly warmly received. That looked great for her back in the United States. I think it's a very big deal for India if Kamala were to win. I think that she would play into that. You'd see more trips by the president there. You'd see more trips by the Americans at high level there. You'd see a lot more CEOs. You'd see Indian entrepreneurs in the US, tech CEOs, bankers, the rest would be very, very active. Ajay Banga, at the World Bank, who's also very close to Kamala Harris, has had a very successful trip to India, meeting with Modi and the rest. He'd be a critical conduit between the United States and India. So, I think that really I have nothing but positive things to say about the implications of this election for US-India relations, either way it goes.
So just before we go, the coconut memes and Kamala's whole focus on her mother is where her Indian lineage really comes through, and there are all of those old videos with Mindy Kaling making dosas and such like, and they really sort of bring home those Indian connections. But there's some Indians who feel like she doesn't really own that side of her. She talks a lot about her mother, but she doesn't own her Indian roots. Is that what it looks like to you?
She comes across to me as an American. When I see her like in California at APEC, we spent a bunch of time together last November. And she is, you would think of her as a very smart, very willing to network, execute. Sharp elbows when she needs. She's gone from being a prosecutor to being a politician. And, American politicians have, they've got a bunch of layers. They're very professional. She is very professional. So, it's not that I don't think she doesn't in any way, I've never seen her disown or try to step away from her Indian background, but I see Kamala as American first and foremost by like a long margin. She's not someone that when you talk to her, spends a lot of time talking about, oh, my immigrant background and everything. No, she thinks of herself fully as an American. California is also such an urban melting pot. Any restaurant you go to, any show, any concert, everyone is hanging. You've got Hispanics and Asians and whites and blacks. And, now granted, there's a lot of segregation by class. There's a lot of hierarchy in terms of, do you have access to money? And that's a problem in the United States. But if we talk about, India, the fact that she hails from India and from Jamaica, her background, a lot. My family, Armenia, Syria, Italy, Germany, and some Native Americans. You have never asked me about that. You and I know each other really well. You've never asked me.
Yeah.
It actually does matter to me. I think it's kind of cool. I like being a mutt. I don't even know, I think if people think of me as white. Am I white given all that? But, I do know that the United States historically has been the one successful country that has welcomed people from all over the world and given us a chance, given us a shot. And that's why, so many Indians have come to the US and have been globally successful in this country. And Kamala Harris is one of them,
Yeah.
So let's not single her out just because she doesn't talk about it all the time.
No, that's just Indians being a little too prickly, but they'd be delighted. I mean, we, not they, we would be delighted. I think you're absolutely right if she were to make it as president, but you're warning us that Trump is still the favorite, and yet we've got 100+ days to go. And if so much can happen in a week, then God only knows what can happen in 100 days. Ian Bremmer, always a pleasure. I know how busy you are. Thanks for making the time, and see you soon.
Great to see you.
Take care. Bye-bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.